Coming to Kickstarter this August is a new dungeon crawler designed by Madi Eisenbach, the creator of Crimson Scales. Additionally, a lot of the team has members of the Gloomhaven community that are very prominent or also involved in the Crimson Scales project. Recently, I was able to sit down and play a game of ROVE with Josh Levinson, more commonly known in the community as Wynitz, and play through a scenario and really get used to not only this wonderful character, the Starling, but also get to learn the mechanics of the game and really understand it. But before we talk about that playtest, let's first answer one question. What is ROVE? ROVE is a game in which you control rovers, which are these very interestingly designed characters, and I really love the bright art style of some of the choices. The artist should be familiar if you've played any Gloomhaven, which if you're watching this from my channel, I'm assuming you have. But unlike most dungeon crawlers, you spend a lot of the time just in deep dark dungeons, and ROVE, you'll be exploring these wonderful terrains, this open area, and then be able to pick, hey, do we want to get the chest over here? And then fighting potentially very dangerous lieutenants at the end. But those are just some of the core tenets the game wants to cover from a design perspective. But what we really are interested in, the crunch. The monsters act on a series of potential actions, both of which have some condition on this or this. And then depending on what chip is drawn, they'll perform one or two different behaviors. Players can then organize between themselves, whichever order they'd like to do, between 3 and potentially 4 actions, including the reaction, which is usually done during the monster's turn. They are performing one action A, one action B, and then one rally or rave. An interesting part of these actions, though, is each card has 2 sides, and a lot of times when you play the card, you'll have to flip it. Some cards involve flipping more than one card when the action is performed. More often than not, raves seem to consist of costing 3 to 5 skill points, whereas rallies cost nothing, often generating skill points. When I play the Starling, often having certain elements in play when using certain skills that generate skill points, and then be able to use them to unleash very powerful attacks. This encourages you to play in a specific style. For example, the Starling focusing on having certain elements. For example, they seem to key off of Fire, Wind, and Yuma a bit. The maximum amount of elements that can be put into play is dependent on the amount of players you have, and unlike Gloomhaven, multiple of each element can be generated. Certain monsters like the Gale Leaper will perform actions depending on if they have 1 or 2 of their chosen element in play. So taking a specific look at the Cabrasa, oh my god, Sparta, you are athletic and want to destroy the avocado. So taking a look at the Cabrasa, which Josh played, you can see that their A action involves them to either perform a very significant move or a really good heal. So that the problem is every turn you have to choose one or the other. You cannot perform both. For action B, you can see there's a defensive ability or an attack. So you can move and shield up. You could potentially heal and shield up. You can move and attack, or you can move, there's just so many options. And that's just your A and B. Additionally, you'll perform a rally or a rave. A rally will often be a weaker thing that could potentially give you just a temporary bonus, often giving you or an ally something that's very small, but can often generate you skill points. And usually when you play a rally, you flip it to the other side. A lot of times rallies will have a rally on either side, allowing to alternate between 2 specific actions. You have a hand of 5 cards, so you have potentially a lot of options when figuring out what do I want to augment this turn. Additionally, the Cabrasa has a cool ability where the Keb and Roxa, the different parts of the character, each have their own style of play. So one is a little bit more defensive, one's a little bit more offensive. So to me, with the Cabrasa having this cool play style of having to flip the cards so you have offense, defense, offense, defense, is very interesting. Whereas the Starling has a lot of ways to generate elements and skill points with its rallies and its reaction. So you put the right elements in play, and then you need to have enemies that have either certain status effects to have really cool effects, having certain elements, often 2 of the same element in play, for its raves that it can unleash for particularly big effects. And I'm not kidding, there are some really big AoEs. If you can line them up correctly, a Starling can really take over and do a lot of damage. Unlike the Cabraxa though, the Starling's basic attacks are a move, and then you can knock something away and generate wind, which is nice. For its other action, you can do a ranged attack, which is pretty nice because sometimes getting into position was annoying. Or you have this wonderful ability to not only infuse fire, but to put a negative status effect on the enemy. One of the cool parts is a lot of your raves infuse their attacks with specific elements and often give you skill points depending on what elements are in play. And as well as they infuse elements and flip it to a potentially powerful rave on the other side. You can look at what enemies are weak to what and then start to figure out, hey, I want to attack these with this, I want to attack these with this, get a skill point for a big attack on them. And that kind of strategy. At first I was like, okay, well that guy's weak to crush and fire, so I'm going to do this so I get plus to my weak attack, but it actually ends up being okay. However, as I discovered throughout the scenario, I'm like, well, I'm going to use that on that, and then I should be able to store this one rave up. It'll take me a couple turns to get that and drop it on both of them. And then I'm like, it's starting to click. And that's how the game is supposed to reward you, because there's not necessarily just gimme mechanics where you're going to just get exactly what you want, and various enemies have various weaknesses. And playing to that advantage, I think, really gives it a little bit more of a dynamic play than Gloomhaven, where it's like, does it have shield and then pierce makes it really good? That's basically the only time that you see like damage types, and it's not even damage types, it's just clearly a mechanic embedded into Gloomhaven. But seeing these return to damage types reminds me of some of the things I like of like Dungeons and Dragons, the old school thing where like people are like, oh, we're fighting undead, remember, bring your maces, guys. And I was like some bits of that, although I didn't like the whole 3.5 edition of where you had to have this whole arsenal because you needed the scaling weapons and all the other and it ended up not being super cool. But to make it to where for most of the time you needed to generate a few elements to like stop this creature from regenerating, or be able to perform crush or fire attacks just to make sure that you get enough damage on it, made it some of these monsters pretty interesting, and I like that about them. One thing, and this is one thing I'm very critical of in all dungeon crawlers, including some of the couple that I'm like in the process of designing, I want to find ways to prevent quarterbacking, and I think ROVE could currently benefit from something like that. Although you could just keep hands hidden. People, they're double-sided. I don't know how you're gonna like hide what abilities you have, and it does encourage open discussion between people, like, hey, I can go first and blah. Sometimes I can see potentially one player just taking over a whole thing and saying, hey, I can do this, and like giving orders to what other people to do with their things. And having a mechanic to stop that would be really nice. I actually like that part of Gloomhaven where it's embedded in the rules, like you can't discuss these certain numbers, you can't do this, you must hide cards, and etc. That really makes quarterbacking while following the rules much more difficult. But that's pretty minor, because ultimately this is one of those situations where sometimes you can just figure this out by saying, like, hey, please stop like telling me what to do with my character. That said, I know some people don't like being confrontational, but still, it's really nice to have anti-quarterbacking tactics in games. I think there's a lot of games that just have powerful attacks, but this feels more rewarding because it's not like, hey, in Gloomhaven where you're like, finally I hit level 5, now I've got this really cool card, and then every rest I'm going to use it. You have to play in a certain way. For example, to build up those skill points, you need to have, for the Starling at least, you need to have certain elements in play while you perform certain attacks. Then you get those skill points. Additionally, there's reactions that you can do to like teleport allies to safety, or turn elements into the elements you want when enemies attempt to infuse them. So you can like say, hey, I'm not sure I like what you're doing, don't infuse it. And then getting skill points by stopping them from infusing elements you don't want to see. As you take control of the elements and perform the right actions, you build up. That's how you build up to unleash these powerful spells. Because you have to do it, it's that much more rewarding when you actually pull those off, which is pretty often, honestly. It doesn't feel like you're spending the whole scenario building up for one spell. They do generate pretty fast. I think the Cabraxa is generating skill points a little faster than my Starling. I don't know if that's by design, but maybe that's something that can be fixed, because I do love the build-up, and I think it's fun when you do get to have those cool raves. And there's a lot of lore that's gone into developing the world of ROVE, this wonderful place called Chorus. So I don't want to spoil like what is Chorus and what are all these beings. You can find that out for yourself. So there's going to be a little bit more when the Kickstarter gets revealed, but I think I love the idea of just, I'm going to learn as I play, and I don't want to know too much. I don't mind learning about the cultures. These are wonderful, interesting creatures. I'm thoroughly enthused about, take a look at this thing. Look at this. I'm just so enthused about this little bugger. And look at this other one, this other artifact. I just want to play it now. I do think the next time I do a playtest, I'm going to be playing that because I think it just looks adorable. So those are largely my first impressions. I actually think that the design space for the monsters is really cool, giving them 4 sets of abilities that's going to depend on whether on X or Y, and X or Y being very different. I like the idea of like, I'm in melee, I'm not melee, I have a certain amount of this element, or I don't have enough of this element, or I'm very hurt, or I'm in good health. Changing the options off that condition also gives you a little bit of control, because I remember when we're looking at the Gale Leapers, I'm like, I can stop them from generating that wind so we can get them some of their weaker actions in a row. And that felt pretty cool because I just like having a little bit more control over that. And it was very cool, although despite that, the game actually ended up hitting pretty hard. I was informed that we weren't doing the typical amount of test monsters for 2-player. Guess Josh had a little bit of confidence with the two of us, but we got through it just fine. So I'm pretty amped to see more about ROVE. I'm actually gonna invite some of the rest of Team Badger to do a playtest between all of us, including not just myself checking it out, and I think we'll get more of a group perspective on it then. But my first impression is I'm very excited for more. A lot of the times, well, sometimes I'll try out a new game for the first time and I'm not going to be enthused on the first play. Gloomhaven actually took a little bit to grow on me, but like Kingdom Death was one of those in the first play. I'm like, I love this. And ROVE has that same feeling. I'm like, I want more. So I'm very excited for their Kickstarter in August. There's a link in the description if you want to learn more information about Chorus, ROVE, or get signed up for updates on it. As per usual, if you want updates on Project ROVE from me, be sure to subscribe. I'll be covering it for a little bit for the rest of the year, and obviously Frosthaven is coming out, and it's going to take an excessive amount of my time. A thank you to all the patrons. You guys are amazing. I thank you so much for your support. I will be including another Patreon poll so you can figure out what kind of Alice Thoughts video we do next, and just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and thank all of you for watching.